The first time I heard the pacing, it was between midnight and 1. We were short-staffed that night, usual for the psych unit, so the charge nurse had me on the locked side and floated the techs where they could. The seclusion room is at the end of the hall, the one everyone treats like a last resort. Steel door with a narrow reinforced window, mattress bolted to the floor, restraints folded and stored on a shelf, and a camera that faces the corner so we can watch without being in the room. Policy says seclusion only after every other safe option has failed, staffed by 2 observers, documented in the chart, and with nursing checks every 15 minutes unless the order says otherwise. I was finishing up paperwork in the nursing station when the tech, who'd been on observation, radioed a short, clipped message. "You hearing this?" His voice had that edge people get when they don't want to sound worried but can't help it either. I told him to describe it. He said footsteps. Slow, measured steps, pacing the perimeter of the room. He said they sounded like someone walking in socks. He said the monitor showed no motion at first. Then the motion sensor light blinked like someone crossed the threshold. Then nothing. I grabbed the tablet and pulled up live footage from the seclusion camera. The room was empty on screen, a square of institutional gray with a strip of mattress against the far wall. Restraints folded on the shelf, just like the checklist said. I watched for a full 2 minutes. Nothing moved. The tech swore the sound kept going. We follow protocol. Cameras don't replace checks, but they help decide the order of things. I told him to take the hall check and open the door from the safety latch so we could verify visually. He walked over, slow, as if he wanted to make sure whatever was making the noise could hear him approach. I heard the corridor get quieter when the door clicked. I felt it, that small, familiar tug of adrenaline that comes with doing something that could be routine or could go sideways. When security came, they didn't want to force the door. They walked the perimeter like pros, sweep the line of sight, listen for anything, announce themselves. I stood at the nurse's station and called out the seclusion checks into the chart. Time, who is present, condition of the room, who ordered the seclusion. It's what we do, anchor ourselves in documentation when things feel off. They unlocked the door, open with a hydraulic clunk. The smell hit me first. Hospital clean, disinfectant, a faint chemical tang from the mattress cover. Nothing else. The mattress was flat and tidy. The restraints were folded on the shelf in a neat bundle. No signs of a struggle, no disturbed sheets, no shoe prints on the vinyl. If somebody had been in there and left, they had done it with more care than a trained staff member changing linens. We did an immediate safety sweep. Security inspected the corners, the vents, the ceiling tiles, a standard because people hide things up there sometimes, and the camera brackets. The tech who'd reported the sound leaned in and touched his palm to the doorframe like he was making sure it was solid. He looked like a man who'd stuck his hand into cold water and couldn't make it warm again. I called the charge nurse and the on-call psychiatrist. We treated it like any unusual event. Incident report, logging the exact times, who observed, and what interventions were taken. That's the paper trail we live for, not because we crave paperwork, but because it forces us to be precise when memory can play tricks. We don't say strange in our notes. We list objective things: time, auditory observation, camera reading, room condition, staff present. We used terms like unexplained auditory phenomenon and no physical evidence of patient presence, clinical, surgical, unemotional. The next day, I pulled the list of patients who had been considered for seclusion in the prior 48 hours. No match. The room had been empty for at least 3 days. Our log confirmed. The last occupant had been discharged and signed out properly. I checked keys and access logs. Only assigned staff badges had proximity entries near the door that night. Nothing unusual in the badge audit trail. The facility engineer measured the room for hollow spaces and took apart the vent cover on his lunch break. He found nothing. Nothing to explain the pacing. You learn in nursing to accept ambiguity while you keep looking for answers. If something could be explained, you explain it. If it can't, you record it and move on, because patient safety still needs to be met. Still, the tech who'd walked the hallway that night didn't move like someone who'd moved on. He started taking a different route past the seclusion room, eyes angled away. A few staff joked in a low way, but the jokes had edges that kept them from being funny. On the third day after the incident, a patient in an adjacent room, someone with a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder and a history of auditory hallucinations, came up to the observation window and said, "I heard the pacing too. It was angry. She said she couldn't see anyone but that the feet were heavy, like they weren't walking like us. She told me it made her heart race, and that it had stopped right when the door clicked. I recorded her statement exactly as given and noted her mental status unchanged from baseline. Her meds and behavior chart showed no change that night. No escalation. No reason for a delusion different from the others she sometimes had." Later, the night's footage was pulled for closer review frame by frame, with the brightness adjusted and the audio waveform expanded. We wanted to know if there were mechanical hums, pipe noises, something that could be misread. Forensic audio amplified what was already strange. There was a soft, thudding pattern captured by the room mic that matched the cadence of human steps, but every time the waveform looked like a footfall, the camera's motion sensor didn't trigger. The signal was real, consistent, human-paced, and yet physically uncorroborated. I watched that waveform on repeat until I could tick out the rhythm with my foot without thinking. People want a story with a hero and villain, a neat resolution. Hospitals are messy. Facts sit next to feelings, and we have to be comfortable holding both. The incident became a teaching point at the next staff meeting: how to document, how to maintain safety, and how to support staff who experienced odd events. We ran through simulations: what to do if a patient reports hearing voices that correspond to environmental noises, how to validate the patient's experience without validating unverified occurrences, and when to pull additional safety resources. What I remember most is not the waveform or the neat restraint bundle. It's the quiet that followed. For several nights, the hall past that seclusion door felt different. Nurses on late shifts kept the corridor light on. We checked the room more often not because policy required it, but because when human beings experience the unexplained, the oldest part of us wants reassurance. One night, I stayed by the window longer than usual, watching the empty mattress, watching the way the institutional clock ticked. I thought about the patients who had been isolated there over the years, the ones who were angry, the ones who were scared, the ones who'd been calmed by soft words and offered a cup of water. Seclusion rooms hold intense things, not just people, but the weight of emergencies, the residue of overnight fear. That's a fact as much as any chart note. Weeks later, an elderly patient who'd been readmitted after a brief medical stay sat with me at the nurses' station. He'd been on our unit years ago and remembered the old floor layout, and a nurse who had a cigarette behind the maintenance shed small, human details. He laughed softly and said, "Those walls remember stuff." I noted his denial, free mood, and gave him his meds. He didn't mean the walls literally. He meant the place carries work and worry the way a pair of boots carries dust. I didn't challenge him. I had the audio waveform in my head and the neat restraints on the shelf. Maybe it was pipes. Maybe it was a patient in another building whose footsteps echoed differently. Maybe it was the building settling. Maybe it was nothing at all and the human brain trying to make pattern from randomness. We closed the incident with a final report that read like any other. Observed auditory phenomenon in an unoccupied seclusion room. No physical evidence of patient presence. Environmental and mechanical inspections normal. Staff provided debrief and support. The event was added to the risk log and scheduled for review at the next safety committee meeting. Procedures were tightened for recording and cross-checking camera and alarm systems. Practical changes, concrete things to do. But there are things paper can't hold. When I walk that hall now, I move with purpose. I check doors. I look at camera monitors with the same professional eye I use to read a pulse. I say the checklist entries aloud the way we were trained to: time, observation, intervention, because doing so grounds me in facts. And sometimes, late at night, when the unit is otherwise silent except for the distant hum of the HVAC, I pause at the corner and listen for a step that isn't there. Not because I believe it will happen again, but because people who work around pain and fear develop a small, religious habit of paying attention to the small things. It keeps us safe. It keeps us human. Group therapy sessions in psych units are structured to be predictable. Chairs arranged in a circle. Windows covered just enough to keep distractions low. A clock on the wall, and a therapist guiding conversation with a steady, calm tone. Patients know the rhythm. Introductions, check-ins, reflections. That afternoon was no different, at least, until the moment everything shifted. It started with a silence that stretched too long. A patient had just finished speaking about his anxiety. Normally, the therapist would redirect or open the floor. Instead, everyone just sat there, quiet, eyes darting around like they were waiting for something. Then, almost in unison, 5 patients turned their heads toward the same corner of the room. One of them whispered, "Did you hear that?" Another nodded, eyes wide. A third, visibly unsettled, said, "It said my name." At first, the therapist assumed it was a shared delusion, a symptom that can spread in vulnerable groups when someone suggests it. But before anyone could dismiss it, the therapist froze too. A faint voice, low and close, seemed to brush past the group. It didn't come from a patient. It came from the farthest corner of the room where no one Saturday. The whisper wasn't clear, but it had the shape of words. Breath against air, deliberate, personal. The therapist later described it as, like someone leaning over your shoulder when you know no one's there. The group was rattled. Some patients pressed themselves back in their chairs, others leaned forward as if straining to catch it again. One patient covered her ears and muttered, "Stop saying it. Stop saying it." Protocol required the therapist to de-escalate, so he grounded the group. Deep breaths, focus back on the circle, reinforce safety. But the atmosphere was broken. Several patients kept glancing back to the corner. One swore he saw the blinds twitch, though the windows were sealed. Another asked to leave the room entirely. Afterwards, staff debated explanations. Could it have been hallway noise bleeding in through vents? A voice carried from outside? But the therapy room had thick soundproofing designed specifically so patients wouldn't be distracted. No one had been in the hall at that time. The log showed security rounds 10 minutes before. When the therapist documented the session, he noted something unusual. He too had heard it, objectively, quietly, without embellishment. He wrote, "Unidentified whispering sound perceived simultaneously by patients and therapist. No source observed." In clinical language, it's all you can say. But the patients remembered it differently. For weeks afterward, they spoke about the voice in group, claiming it said their names. Some insisted it was male, others female, but every single one agreed. It was close. Not imagined, not in their heads close. That corner of the therapy room gained a reputation. Some patients refused to sit facing it. Others left their chairs angled away. And the therapist, though professionally steady, quietly requested sessions be rotated to different rooms when possible. The strangest part? During the next group, when the chairs were shifted and the circle sat further from that corner, the blinds in that exact spot shivered. The HVAC wasn't running. No one had moved. And still, every patient's eyes turned toward it, waiting for the whisper to come back. Every hospital has that one place staff avoid, even if no one admits it out loud. For us, it was the staff elevator after midnight. By day, it worked like any other elevator. The hum of the motor, the flick of fluorescent lights on the ceiling, the chatter of nurses moving patients, food trays, or supplies. Routine. But by night, specifically at 3 a.m., the elevator followed its own ritual. Without anyone touching the panel, without a call from another floor, the elevator would slow and stop at the locked basement level. The doors would slide open wide, exposing nothing but pure blackness. That basement hadn't been in use for years. Record storage was moved, the morgue relocated, the corridors sealed. The only way to reach it was through that one elevator shaft. The first time it happened to me, I was alone, riding up with charts tucked under my arm. The elevator shuddered, stopped, and the B button glowed even though I hadn't pressed it. The doors opened. What came in wasn't just air, it was heavy, wet, cold, the kind that clings to skin. And there was a smell I'll never forget. Damp concrete, mildew, and underneath it something metallic, faint but sharp. I stepped back instinctively. The light in the elevator car should have spilled out, bouncing off the walls, but it didn't. It was as though the light got swallowed by the dark. I pressed the close door button again and again. The doors lingered, then finally sealed shut. I told myself it was a glitch, just a mechanical glitch. But then I learned I wasn't the only one. Every nurse, every orderly, every security guard who worked that shift had their own version of the story. Some swore that just before the doors closed, they heard faint wheels squeaking on tile like a stretcher being rolled across the floor. Others said they caught the reflection of someone else standing behind them in the mirrored panel, someone who wasn't there when they turned around. Facilities ran tests. Engineers replaced circuits, rewired panels, ran full diagnostics on the system. Nothing changed. Every night, at the same hour, the elevator stopped at the basement and opened its doors to nothing. The scariest report came from a nurse who worked in ICU. She told me she stepped into the elevator at 2:58 a.m., heading up to the 7th floor. But the car went straight down instead. She hit every button, but it ignored her and stopped on B. When the doors opened, she swore she heard someone whisper her name from the darkness. She pressed herself against the back wall until the doors shut again. After that, she refused to take that elevator at night. We developed our own rituals. Some of us wouldn't look out into the basement at all. If the doors opened, we kept our eyes on the panel lights until they closed. Others rode in pairs at that hour, never alone. A few nurses even carried small pocket crosses or whispered prayers under their breath as the car descended. But the thing that unsettled us most wasn't the doors or the sounds. It was the timing. Always 3 a.m. Not 2:59, not 3:07. Exactly 3:0. Like the elevator wasn't broken at all, like it was keeping an appointment. And if you worked long enough, eventually, it kept that appointment with you. It happened on the 5th floor, where the barred windows faced nothing but open air. That night, the scream came from a patient's room so loud it froze the entire ward. I dropped the chart in my hand and ran with the others toward the sound. The patient was standing against the wall, trembling, his arm outstretched toward the window. He was shouting, "He's looking at me! He's right there!" We rushed to the curtain, and when I pulled it back, I felt my breath catch in my throat. There was a face pressed against the outside glass, pale, almost gray, with features distorted by the pressure of the glass, cheeks flattened, lips parted, eyes dark and wide. For 2 solid seconds, it stared directly into the room. But there was nowhere for it to be. That window looked out over a sheer drop, 5 stories down to the pavement. No fire escape, no scaffolding, no ledge, just a vertical wall of brick. We secured the patient, called security, and pulled facilities immediately. By the time they arrived, the face was gone. The glass was spotless, no condensation, no fingerprints, nothing. It was as though nothing had ever been there. Still, the patient refused to stay in that room. He begged to be moved, saying the figure whispered his name through the glass. He kept repeating it, shaking so badly we had to medicate him just to stabilize his heart rate. We logged everything, because that's what protocol demands. In my note, I wrote, "Patient reported visual hallucination. Staff confirmed presence of unidentified face at window for approximately 2 seconds. No environmental explanation." That's as close as I could get to the truth without writing the word impossible. But the story didn't end there. Over the next week, the same patient woke up at the exact same time every night, 2:17 a.m. Each time, he pointed at that window and whispered. He watched me. He wouldn't even look at the glass during the day. Security combed the outside wall with a boom lift. They checked for ledges, structural cracks, or evidence of someone climbing. Nothing. No footprints on the roof, no damage to the bars. No reason for anyone to be there. And yet, staff began to avoid drawing that curtain at night. Some said if you stood too long in front of the glass, you'd catch your reflection shifting subtle at first, then unmistakable. A mouth moving when yours didn't. Eyes that lingered after you turned away. We moved patients out of that room more often than policy allowed. Quietly. Without drawing attention. Because it wasn't just one man anymore, others reported the same thing. A pale face pressed against the glass, staring in from a place no living person could stand. And no matter how many times facilities cleared it, every one of us knew that window wasn't empty. Night shift has its rhythm. Lights dimmed in the halls, the hum of the HVAC louder than voices, staff moving in softer steps so the ward can rest. On psych nights, we cling to routine. 15-minute checks, charting meticulously, logging every behavior so nothing slips through. Patients asleep are the closest thing to quiet we get. That's why this incident unsettled every single one of us. The patient had been restless earlier in the evening, pacing, muttering, refusing snacks. But by midnight, he finally drifted off. I charted it myself. Patient resting quietly in bed, respirations even. The monitor by the door showed no movement beyond normal shifting. Everything looked routine. At 12:45, I started rounds again. His door was closed, but I opened it gently like I always do. That's when my stomach dropped. The bed was empty. The blanket was folded back neatly, pillow indented, but no patient. First rule: don't assume. Patients can move quickly, sometimes slipping into bathrooms or corners. But this was different. The bathroom door was open, light off, and the room was bare. He was simply gone. I checked the door. Locked. Every door on that unit is secured by proximity badges. There's no way he could have wandered out unnoticed. I alerted the charge nurse. Within minutes, the whole night team was searching. Security was called, cameras reviewed. We scoured every hallway, every seclusion room, even the supply closets. Nothing. Panic began to creep in, quiet but sharp. Staff don't like to admit it, but when a psych patient vanishes from a locked unit, your mind leaps to lawsuits, escapes, safety breaches. But beneath that, in the pit of my gut, was something worse. How could he have gotten out at all? The camera feeds were pulled up. Every angle of the corridor, the nurse's station, the stairwell watched in real time and replayed back. Not once did the patient appear. It was as though he'd evaporated from his bed. 30 minutes passed before we found him. I opened his door again, more from instinct than hope, and froze. He was back in bed, exactly where he'd been charted before, breathing slow and even, blanket drawn up to his chest, like he'd never left. We woke him gently, asked if he'd gone anywhere. He blinked at us groggily, confused, insisting he hadn't moved. His vitals were normal, no signs of exertion, no evidence of wandering. When I looked at the bed, the indentation on the mattress hadn't shifted since my last charting, as if he'd been lying there the entire time. We logged everything, of course. Patient unaccounted for during routine safety check, later observed resting in bed. No security breach noted. No camera evidence of patient leaving room. The words looked clinical, clean. But none of us who were there believed the simplicity of those lines. For the rest of that shift, no one said much. We just carried on, whispering more than usual, double-checking rooms we'd already checked. Every 15 minutes, like clockwork, I opened his door again. And every time, he was there, breathing steady, asleep. Like the missing 30 minutes had been a collective mistake. But we hadn't imagined it. I know what I saw. A bed empty, door locked, cameras clear. And when I think back on it now, the strangest detail is the blanket. When he vanished, it was folded back neatly, pillow dented like he'd just risen. When he reappeared, it was the same. Not rumpled, not disturbed. As if the patient and the bed had been waiting all along. Every hospital has its quiet zones, the places no one likes to linger. For us, it was the East Wing. That corridor had been closed for years, patient load dropped, budgets cut, and eventually the doors were locked, lights shut off, and the space was sealed. It was just bare linoleum floors, empty rooms, and silence. At least, that's what it was supposed to be. But at night, especially between 2 and 4 in the morning, we'd hear it. screaming. It wasn't muffled like pipes or the wind through vents. It was sharp, human, desperate, the kind of scream that makes you break into a run because you're certain someone is being hurt. We'd drop what we were doing and head for the east wing doors, keys out, adrenaline spiking. And every time, the result was the same: silence. Security swept that hallway dozens of times. They'd unlock the doors, lights flickering on, radios crackling. They walked every room, every stairwell, every closet. Nothing. No patients. No signs of entry. Dust so thick on the floor it clung to their boots untouched until we stirred it. At first we tried to rationalize it. Old ventilation systems can make strange noises, especially in wings that aren't maintained. But I'll tell you this: vents don't sound like a woman shrieking at the top of her lungs. They don't start and stop so abruptly, like someone gasping between cries. One night, 3 of us were charting when the screaming started again. All of us heard it at the same time. It echoed down the locked corridor, bounced off the walls, long and drawn out. We froze, looked at each other, and then sprinted with security. But as soon as we got the doors open, it was gone. No echo, no residual sound, just cold air drifting through empty rooms. Facilities inspected everything. They checked for squatters, faulty alarms, even wildlife. Nothing explained it. Cameras installed facing the wing captured the noise on audio, but the footage showed empty halls. One recording made the rounds among staff: a 30-second clip of an empty corridor with a scream so loud it clipped the mic. The official report? Unverified auditory anomaly. We kept documenting it, because that's what policy demands. Screaming noises reported by staff. Security sweep conducted. No occupants located. Clean, detached, clinical words. But they didn't capture what it felt like to stand outside that locked door at 3 a.m., listening to someone who wasn't there beg for help. Eventually, staff started avoiding that side of the hospital. If you had to walk past, you quickened your pace. No one lingered by those doors. And whenever the screaming started, we didn't ask, "What was that?" anymore. We asked the only question that mattered: why does it always sound like it's coming from the same room? Psych wards have a rhythm, and you learn to pick up on patterns: what's delusional chatter, what's triggered memory, what's just background noise of a restless unit. But when different patients on different wards start saying the same thing, you pay attention. For weeks, I kept hearing it. A muttered word at first, half slurred from a patient coming out of sedation. Another patient whispered it during group therapy, rocking back and forth like it was some mantra. Still another, days later, scrawled it on the margin of his coloring sheet in dull crayon. Always the same: Keller, or sometimes more clearly, Dr. Keller. At first, I brushed it off. Shared delusions happen, especially when patients overhear each other. But the thing was, these people weren't housed together. One was in geriatrics, another in adolescent psych, another in the adult locked ward. They never interacted. No way they'd pass that detail around. One night, I asked a patient outright, "Who is Dr. Keller?" He looked at me blankly at first, then frowned. His lips trembled like he wasn't sure if he should answer. Finally, he whispered, "He checks on me at night." That got under my skin, because there was no one by that name on staff. I checked the roster, HR files. The psychiatrist, schedule nothing. A week later, a patient on a different floor asked me if Dr. Keller was working that evening. When I asked what he looked like, the patient described a tall man in a long white coat, hair slicked back, carrying a leather notebook. Old-fashioned details, down to the wire-framed glasses. Curiosity turned to unease. On my day off, I went into medical records. Buried in the archive files from the 1940s, I found the name Dr. Edwin Keller, psychiatrist. Worked in the same hospital during the war years, specializing in what they called shell shock. His file was brief, but one note stood out. Died suddenly on hospital grounds, 1947. That discovery spread quietly among staff. Some shrugged it off. Others, especially the old-timers, admitted they'd heard the name years ago, muttered by patients long since discharged or deceased. After that, it was hard not to notice the pattern. Always in low light, always after midnight, patients spoke of him. One swore Dr. Keller had leaned over their bed, cold hands pressing on their chest. Another said they heard his pen scratching in that leather notebook, even though no one else was in the room. We documented it clinically. Patient reports visual. Auditory hallucination of figure identified as Dr. Keller. No staff present by that name. But privately, among ourselves, we stopped dismissing it. To this day, if you work nights and hear a patient murmur Keller, you don't ignore it. You check the halls. You steady your voice. And you remind yourself that sometimes hospitals hold on to more than charts and history, they hold on to the names of those who never left. Hospitals at night have a way of magnifying sound. Every cough carries down the hallway. Every footstep echoes longer than it should. That's why when patients start reporting noises, we listen. We log it, we verify, and we try to trace the source. But what unsettled us most were the reports that kept coming back with the same description. Different patients, in different rooms, began telling us they'd woken to find a little boy sitting at the foot of their bed, not standing in the corner, not running through the hall, sitting at the end of the mattress, small shoulders hunched, his face buried in his hands, crying softly. The details were consistent. He was always described as about 7 or 8 years old, dark hair, wearing clothes that didn't fit the present-day shorts, too short, a plain button-up shirt. The sound of his crying was always the same, quiet, broken sobs, like a child who had been left behind. Patients said when they reached out to comfort him, he vanished. Others said when they tried to speak, he only cried harder until they blinked, and then he was gone. The unsettling part? Our hospital doesn't have a pediatric unit. It never has, not even decades back. There was no reason any child should be in those wards, and certainly not appearing in multiple patient reports across locked wings. At first, we documented them as hallucinations, delirium from fever, side effects from medication, disorientation in the middle of the night. But the stories wouldn't stop. And then, one night, a nurse admitted she heard it too. She was making rounds at 3 a.m., pausing by the nurse's station to chart vitals, when she heard soft crying just down the corridor. It was distinct, not a patient, not an adult, but a child. She followed the sound, certain she'd find someone in distress. But when she reached the room it came from, the patient was asleep, monitors steady. The only thing out of place was the empty chair at the foot of the bed, rocking slightly, as though someone had just risen from it. Security combed the halls. They found nothing. Cameras caught nothing. And yet, more patients reported the same boy over the following weeks. One elderly woman told me, with tears in her own eyes, he just wanted his mother. Another swore she felt the mattress sink beneath his weight. A third described the boy lifting his head long enough for her to see his face pale, streaked with tears, eyes too old for his years. She said he looked at her like he recognized her, then disappeared. We filed the reports. We wrote them clean and clinical. Patient reports auditory, visual hallucination of child, no pediatric patients present, no environmental stimulus found. But none of those words captured the chill of knowing different people from different wards, on different meds, with no contact were describing the same child. Now, when night staff hear a patient stir suddenly and whisper, "Who's that boy?" we don't waste time telling them it's in their head. We check the room, we sit with them, and we listen to the quiet, waiting for the sound of soft crying to fade back into the silence. Because whatever the explanation, one thing is certain. Too many patients have seen him sitting there, at the foot of their beds, for us to dismiss him completely. Psych wards are rarely quiet. Even at night you'll hear something. A patient pacing the hall, someone humming, a chair scraping, the faint clatter of a food tray. Noise is constant, part of the atmosphere. That's why the night it all stopped is still burned into my memory. It was just after 9 p.m. The day shift had handed off, meds were given, and most patients were settled into their routines, reading, playing cards, talking in low tones. I was charting at the nurse's station when it happened. The ward went silent. Not gradually, like when people drift off to sleep. Instantly. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, cards dropped onto the table. A patient laughing just seconds before froze, mouth half open, then shut. 20 patients in one shared space, and suddenly, not a sound. I stood up, thinking maybe a staff member had given a command I hadn't heard. But no one had. The silence was total. Not just the patients, but the usual background sounds seemed gone too, the humming, the shifting of chairs, even the buzz of restless energy that always lingers in a psych unit. The patients were motionless, eyes fixed ahead, some staring at the floor, others at the wall. None of them looked at each other. None looked at us. The charge nurse whispered, "What just happened?" But her voice felt too loud in the stillness, like she'd broken into something private. One of the techs tried prompting the group. No one responded. He clapped his hands once sharp, echoing. Normally, half the room would flinch. No one moved. For almost a full minute, they just sat, perfectly still, breathing in unison like they were waiting for something. Then, just as suddenly, it ended. A patient coughed, another shuffled cards. Conversations resumed right where they'd left off, as if no time had passed. We checked vitals on several of them, pulse, respirations, responsiveness, all normal. No signs of seizure activity, no shared medical event. When asked later if they remembered, most shrugged. A few said they hadn't noticed anything strange at all. But one patient, a quiet older man, whispered to me privately, "We had to be quiet." He was listening. When I pressed him, he wouldn't say more. He just shook his head and stared at the far corner of the ward. The incident was documented clinically. At 21, 7 patients simultaneously ceased activity for approximately 1 minute. No abnormal vitals recorded. Activity resumed spontaneously. No precipitating factor identified. Just words on a page that didn't capture how it felt to stand in that silence. Because in that moment, it wasn't just the patients who froze. Every staff member felt it too, the sense that something else was in the room with us. Not visible, not measurable, but present, watching, listening. And even now, when the ward grows quiet, I catch myself holding my breath, waiting for that stillness to return. Bathroom checks are routine on psych wards. We have to keep them accessible but safe, making sure patients can't lock themselves in or harm themselves inside. Every door is fitted with special hinges and emergency keys, so when one jams, we treat it as urgent. That night, it was around 1:30 in the morning. A tech tried to open the single-stall bathroom off the East Hall. The handle wouldn't budge. He thought maybe a patient had slipped inside, but the occupancy light wasn't on. He knocked, called out no answer. Still, protocol demanded we act like someone might be in trouble. We tried the staff key. Nothing. The lock wouldn't turn. The charge nurse called security. Within minutes, 3 of us were outside that door, listening. We didn't hear water running, didn't hear anyone moving, but the air felt heavy, like the space behind the door was holding its breath. Security forced the door with a shoulder hit. The frame splintered just enough for the latch to give. The second the door swung inward, the smell hit us sharp, chemical, like disinfectant mixed with sweat, but the stall was empty. No one inside. The real shock was the mirror. It was covered in handprints. Not smudges or streaks like you'd expect from one person. Dozens of distinct prints, overlapping, pressed into the glass from every angle. Some were large, adult-sized. Others were small, like a child's palm. All of them looked fresh, as if they'd just been made. The edges still had the shine you see when skin oils first touch glass. We stood there in silence. The tech who'd first found the door whispered, "We just cleaned this bathroom yesterday." He wasn't wrong. Housekeeping logs showed it had been sanitized and checked off at 6 p.m. Security searched the space top to bottom. No footprints on the floor, no signs anyone had forced their way in. The window was bolted shut. The vent was too small for entry. The mirror was the only thing disturbed. We documented it by the book. Bathroom door found inoperative. Forced entry conducted by security. No occupant found. Mirror observed with multiple fresh handprints. Environmental services notified. Clean, clinical language that didn't reflect the knot in our stomachs. Environmental services came in with gloves and solvent. They scrubbed the mirror until it gleamed. For a few days, things were quiet. Then, one night, the same bathroom jammed again. This time, when it opened easily on the second try, the mirror was clean. But staff swore they heard a faint tapping from inside the glass before the door gave way. After that, nobody wanted to use that bathroom during night shift. Patients avoided it too. They'd glance at the door, shake their heads, and ask to be walked down to the other side instead. And honestly, none of us argued. Because even now, whenever I pass that hallway, I picture those dozens of palms pressed against the mirror, like something inside was desperate to get out, or desperate to be noticed. Every hospital has its stories, and every nurse knows better than to believe them. Still, there's one I can't shake. We called it the last discharge. Nights follow a rhythm. You check meds, make sure patients are settled, do your rounds, chart everything in black and white. On paper, it's simple. In practice, it's an unpredictable mix of panic attacks, wandering patients, and the occasional code blue. That night wasn't unusual. The ward was calm, doors locked, everyone accounted for. I had just finished logging vitals when I noticed something out of place near the exit doors, a figure. At first, I thought it was one of my patients, standing still under the red glow of the exit sign. He was tall, broad-shouldered, head lowered. I remember thinking, how the hell did he get down here? Those doors were alarmed. Nobody could reach them without a keycard. I walked closer, calling out, "Sir? You need to head back to your room." No response. Just silence. When I reached the door, the space was empty. The glass reflected only me. The next morning, I mentioned it in passing. Another nurse just gave me this look, half amused, half afraid. "You saw him too?" she asked. I thought she was joking, until she described the same thing, a patient standing by the doors, waiting. Same posture, same silence. She swore she'd seen him twice. Then an older orderly chimed in. "That's the discharge ghost. Been around since before I started here. Always at the doors, like he's waiting to be let out." I laughed it off at first, but their faces weren't joking. Curiosity got the better of me. During downtime, I started combing through old discharge papers. You'd be surprised how thick those files get, handwritten notes from decades ago. Some yellowed with age. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it. A name that appeared again and again. A patient who had been treated here for years. Schizoaffective disorder. Severe depression. Multiple suicide attempts. He died on the ward, but there was no discharge record. His file ended abruptly, as if someone just stopped writing. The thought landed heavy. Maybe he never left because no one ever signed him out. Weeks passed. I convinced myself it was stress, a trick of the eye. Until one night. I was finishing rounds when I heard the faintest sound, the door alarm clicking, like someone had brushed against it. My stomach dropped. I turned the corner, and there he was again. Same figure, same stillness. His head lifted slightly this time, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face in the exit light. I swear he looked expectant, like he thought I could open the door for him. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to step back, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Then, without a sound, he was gone. After that, I stopped laughing when others brought him up. New hires brushed it off until they saw him themselves. Some refused to do night rounds near that hallway. We all noticed the pattern. He only appeared by the doors. Never in patient rooms, never in the halls. Always there, waiting. The theory became almost ritual among staff. He was stuck, trapped in the building, waiting for a discharge that never came. To this day, I don't know what's worse, the idea that he's real, or the idea that our minds, trained to handle the worst of human suffering, invented him to explain the unexplained weight of working here. But I can tell you this, every time I finish a night shift, walking past those doors, I glance up, and I almost expect to see him standing there, waiting, still waiting for someone to sign his final discharge. Maybe he's not waiting for paperwork. Maybe he's waiting for a nurse, like me, to open the door. Hi. I just want to take a moment to thank every single one of you for being here. Your support means more than words can ever express. Every view, every like, every comment, it all helps keep this channel alive and growing. If you've enjoyed these stories, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really makes a huge difference. I'd also love to hear from you. Share your own experiences in the comment section, and let me know where you're watching from. Hearing your stories and seeing the places you all come from is one of the best parts of this community. Thank you again for being part of this journey with me.